Welcome back. It's now my great honor to introduce the Honorable Michael Kirby. In Don't Forget the Justice Bit, a wonderful documentary on the life of our next speaker that is readily available on the web, a leading Australian lawyer says that even early on in Michael Kirby's professional career, he was the Atticus Finch of New South Wales civil liberties. Now, Michael Kirby retired from his great nation's court of last resort, the High Court of Australia, in 2009, on which he had served from 1996. His record there, where he was often referred to as the Great Dissenter, places him in the pantheon of legal greats in not only Australia, but the English-speaking world. But as perhaps the Atticus Finch incident presaged, his service there was probably not much more than a tangent to the arc of a most remarkable career. He was a member of the World Health Organization's inaugural Global Commission on AIDS, for example, and has held many formal and ad hoc leadership positions addressing the HIV/AIDS pandemic and health as a human right. He is well known as a gay man who has been an outspoken advocate of LGBTQ rights around the world, including critiquing the attitude of certain organized religions toward LGBTQ rights. Indeed, there is a striking photograph on the web of him addressing the Cardinal Secretary of the State of the Vatican on this very issue in 2019. And he's been a great friend of our university. He has served on the board of the Kinsey Institute. He has lectured at IU on multiple occasions, including one memorable talk in 2004 in Bloomington on the international response of courts to terrorism, perhaps the finest lecture I have ever heard. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you share the sense of honor I feel that we have with us today a great citizen of the world, the Honorable Michael Kirby.
Thank you very much, Frank, for that excessive introduction. I'm getting used to that from you, and it's always a delight. I had a judicial colleague once who said, when somebody says flattering things about a judge, they never say, stop, I don't want it. They always encourage even more. I'm very proud to be involved in this webinar, and I congratulate the two excellent speakers who have spoken earlier. Justice David, with his very interesting story from his own life, which had resonances of my own, and Professor Emmett for his wonderful and often passionate remarks about the United States of America and multilateralism and international law and institutions. Today, the 25th of February, in 1988, 33 years ago, I was in Bangalore, India, and at a very interesting conference of judges, most of them from Commonwealth countries, but there were two judges who were not on final courts. One of them was myself. I was then the president of the Court of Appeal of New South Wales, Australia, which is the busiest appeal court in the Australian nation, but not a final court. And the other was a young judge from Washington, D.C., Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she was a judge of the DC Circuit, the appeal courts in the federal system. And we formed a close friendship. The Bangalore meeting was actually about the international application by municipal judges, domestic national judges, of international human rights norms as contextual matters in the course of deciding cases in their own jurisdictions. And that was something which Ruth and I put our signatures to. We supported it, and in fact, it had a number of supporters on the United States Supreme Court, but it had a number of justices of that distinguished court who thought it was complete heresy. And the leader of that brigade was my old friend Justice Scalia. And we often, when he came to Australia, we would have sell-out debates, because he took a view that anything that happened outside the United States you could completely ignore, whereas the Bangalore principles urged every judge to move with the times of the Boeing 707s and the great developments of the world that have occurred. And that became a very controversial thing in my own court in Australia. So it's something upon which, at least in Australia and the United States, there are still people who think it a heresy. But of course, in most countries of Europe and in many countries of the world, living in the world of internationalism and in the world of international problems like COVID-19, we've got to live and work together. And that involves taking as a contextual matter the developments of international law. But my contribution to this webinar today falls somewhere between the particular excellent contribution by Justice David about his inspiring story as a young American military person who was assigned the task to represent people who were charged and in detention in Guantanamo Bay. And we in Australia, in the course of deciding many refugee cases in islands off the coast of our country, to which we had sent refugee applicants, had cause to look at the unfolding decisions of the United States federal courts and the United States Supreme Court on the issues of Guantanamo Bay and the way we were dealing with terrorism suspects and also with refugee applicants. So Justice David sets one course on our mind's journey to come to grips with the world of international law. And the magnificent address which we've just heard by Professor Frank Emmett shows how this is right up to date. This is something that is really critical to peace and security in the world, because you're not going to have peace and security in our world in a very dangerous time of nuclear weapons and nuclear proliferation again, unless international law can be brought to bear on the problems of our age. And in my life, especially when I was on the Court of Appeal of New South Wales, where I wasn't subject to strictures of our federal constitution, I served on a number of international bodies, as Justice Sullivan has pointed out. One of them was the Global Commission on AIDS, and another of them was as special representative of Secretary General Boutros Boutros-Ghali for human rights in Cambodia. So these were experiences of trying to utilize international cooperation for the benefit of humanity and utilize international law and international institutions. But the biggest challenge I faced was one that was given to me in 2013 by the Human Rights Council of the United Nations when I was appointed by the president of that council, the ambassador of Poland, as the chair of a commission of inquiry on human rights violations in North Korea, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, as it is formally called. And with two colleagues, brilliant colleagues with a background in international law and international human rights law, Marzuki Darusman, who had been the Attorney General of Indonesia and the Prosecutor General of Indonesia, and Sonja Beserko, who was a professor in Serbia and a leading advocate of human rights in the war-torn country of Serbia in the former Yugoslavia. We three were the three members of a commission of inquiry which was established to investigate human rights violations in North Korea. There was already a special rapporteur who was appointed to investigate human rights, and that was Marzuki Darusman. But North Korea would not allow him to enter their country. They have a very closed-off country and society, and the numbers of reports that were coming in of violence, cruelty, and breaches of human rights and discrimination were so powerful that when the president of the Human Rights Council paused for a call for a vote, the Human Rights Council adopted the establishment of the Commission of Inquiry, nem con. No call was made for a vote. It's the only time that has ever happened in the history of the Human Rights Council. And it happened because there was, by 2013, a great deal of evidence of the human rights violations in North Korea. And we were given a mandate with 9 paragraphs, and our job was to report to the Human Rights Council. And we set about our work efficiently. We met within weeks. We met in Geneva in those pre-COVID days. And although the normal way that European countries conduct inquiries is not the way we tend to conduct them in English-speaking countries, and although the way the Europeans do it has from the beginning of the United Nations greatly affected the way the United Nations does inquiries, I was able to persuade my 2 colleagues, both of whom were from civil law traditions of Europe, the Serbians in Europe, the Indonesian, because their legal system was based on that of the Netherlands. They do inquiries very efficiently, behind closed doors generally, and they gather the material quickly and effectively. We in the Anglo-American world do it more slowly, a bit more inefficiently, but it is based on really medieval views of the British in England that they should conduct inquiries in public, because they had this theory that if you do that, you're more likely to get material to come forward, and you're more likely to persuade those who are the subject of the inquiry and the community around them that what you have done is fair, has been conducted fairly, and has reached conclusions that are compelling, convincing, and right. And so within weeks of our establishment, that's what we decided to do. And they'd never had a commission of inquiry of the Human Rights Council that did an inquiry that way. And so we had a whole series of public hearings of a kind that a lawyer from Indiana would be very familiar with, and a lawyer from Australia and from Britain and from the United States. We had public hearings. We invited the media. We invited the people who came as witnesses. Where it was safe, we invited them to give their testimony in public. Most of them agreed and wanted to speak in public of the terrible wrongs that had been done to them. We recorded what they said. We recorded it on film, and we have put that record on the internet, and it's available tonight. You can go home and Google the UN Commission of Inquiry on North Korea, and you'll go straight into the testimony of the people who gave witness of the way human rights had been breached in their cases. And those records are still there, and they are a compelling case for action by the United Nations in dealing with the problem of North Korea. And problem it is. But the problem that I want to speak about with you is relevant to what Professor Emmett has said and what Justice David has said about the world in which nuclear weapons and extremely dangerous situations can sometimes present an impediment to the action by the United Nations following up findings of human rights violations in countries of our world. And this is the essential problem we face in North Korea. How do we deal with a state which is a rogue state and conducts itself in ways that are terribly offensive to human rights treaties and principles and the general law of human rights? How do you deal with those issues when, if you even mention human rights, they don't want to take any part? They say this is antagonistic to our country and its great socialist revolution, and they don't want to cooperate in any way. So this is the essential problem I want to focus on. But I will tell you something about what the Commission of Inquiry did. I will recount what I see as its successes and its failures. And I will then confront the issue that was presented by the steps that were taken by President Trump when he was in office, and the potential for President Biden to do things in a somewhat different and more orthodox way. Now, so far as the work of the Commission, we had a wonderful secretariat. Don't let people tell you that the UN is riddled with time servers and people who make up their mind and have got political agendas. We had a secretariat. They were about 12. Most of them had been officers of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. But just as we, the commissioners, had to take an oath or make an affirmation that we would uphold the principles of international law and reach conclusions by fair process and which were conformable to international law, so the officers of the Secretariat worked independently for the Commission of Inquiry, and they had to do the same. And we got our report written effectively in the year of our appointment, 2013, and it then had to be translated into the major United Nations languages, and it was presented to the world media in February of 2014, and it was formally presented to the Human Rights Council in March of 2015. We were unanimous in our conclusions. The conclusions were expressed in our report. I was the only native English speaker amongst the three commissioners, and I made it my task to ensure that the report was written in English that was comfortable and that was readable. Many UN reports that I've read are not readable, and I'm sure Professor Emmett would agree with that. But the report of the Commission of Inquiry on North Korea, here it is. It should, you know, the UN produces these reports, and some of them are readable and some of them are very readable. This report is very readable, but the UN is not good at publishing. The report is only this size. It should have been, if the thing had been done in the most effective way, it should have been taken on, published by the private sector or published by the UN, and available at every airport when the airports worked, and every bookshop, but that didn't happen. But it's on the web, it's on the internet, but the internet is not available in North Korea. In North Korea, the only groups that can get access to the internet are the friends of the government and those who are supporters of the regime of the Supreme Leader, Kim Jong-un. Anyway, we produced our report. It was produced by the methodology that I've mentioned. It is readable, and the question is, okay, what's happened? Well, the report followed faithfully the 9 matters of agenda that we were given by the Human Rights Council. People who do inquiries and don't attend to their terms of reference are a menace. But also I found, and I'm sure that Justice Sullivan and Justice David will agree with this, on a final court or a state final court, another menace are judges who give decisions and don't record their findings. You know, you've got to go searching for what on earth their findings were. But we made our reports, and we very specifically and clearly said what we found relevant to our terms of reference. But more than that, in the course of writing our report, we wrote them as an inquirer in the United States or in Australia or in the UK would do. On every page of this report, or at least every second page, in dealing with the matter that had been referred to us by the Human Rights Council, we would quote what a witness had said had been their experience where we accepted it, because so much more powerful than the language of the reporter or of the report writer is the language of the victim. And they, if you accept that they're telling the truth, they can put it more powerfully and more sharply and with greater emphasis for action than you can. And therefore, every second page has quotes. And in this way, people who had suffered human rights abuses were given the facility of speaking truth to power, and speaking to the Secretary General of the United Nations, and speaking to the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. Well, whether it was on the locking up of people who were political prisoners, the public executions that take place in North Korea, the drowning of babies in a bucket of water when they were brought by their mothers from China back into North Korea, all of the matters we dealt with were extremely powerfully and I think convincingly dealt with in the report. Of course, North Korea said these are all self-selected people. They've come forward. Most of them were refugees in South Korea. And in South Korea, there are some 30,000 refugees, more now, who have escaped. During the winter months in North Korea, they can walk across the frozen rivers into China, or at least they could for a period of time, and then get onto an escape line in China and get out of China to Laos, to Cambodia, or to Vietnam, or to Thailand. And under the constitution of the Republic of Korea, South Korea, if they can get to a ROK, Republic of Korea embassy, they can get a passport. That's as it was in Germany. They have a right to be a citizen of the Republic of Korea, which claims it is the only Republic of Korea. Likewise, North Korea claims it is the only Democratic People's Republic of Korea. But if you can get the passport, you can then get on a plane and you can then get into South Korea, and you can be given support and financial aid and education and other opportunities. So that is what we did. We gave this chance to speak truth to power. And let me pause to say here, if we never did anything else, if nothing else happened out of the report of the Commission of Inquiry on North Korea, this was a good thing that the United Nations did. And it brought the truth of what is going on to this day in North Korea to attention. Now, North Korea desperately wanted to have a meeting with the President of the United States. But under President George W. Bush and under President Obama, you could only get that meeting if you would give a verifiable and irreversible guarantee of ending the nuclear development. Because from early in the 21st century, North Korea, in order to establish its power and credentials, had begun developing nuclear weapons. It has to be said that the development of nuclear weapons by North Korea and the development, moreover, of missile systems for delivering the weapons astonished the West. No one expected that they would be able to do it as quickly and apparently effectively as they have done. And there is now the belief in informed circles that they have at least 30 nuclear warheads, and more especially, they've developed the missiles that can deliver them. You'll remember from the very first atomic bomb, it was called the Fat Boy, the Big Boy. And the problem with it was a very big bomb. But what you had to do with the nuclear weapons in Korea was to develop a smaller warhead. And apparently North Korea has been able to do that. And therefore it makes it not only difficult and dangerous for Japan, over which territory the missiles have been delivered, but potentially dangerous, at least to the west coast of the United States and possibly elsewhere. So it's a very dangerous situation, a very dangerous situation. And the world has to face up to the dangers that it now faces, not only in Korea, but as Professor Emmett said, in Iran and in other countries that have developed or are developing nuclear warheads and missiles to deliver them. So when President Trump came to office, you'll remember his first speech to the General Assembly of the United Nations was a very antagonistic speech, addressed at North Korea. He said that little rocket man, as he called Kim Jong-un, would pay a price if he did anything to endanger the United States or its allies. And he threatened in that event the Democratic People's Republic of Korea would be laid waste, which was itself a rather unlawful assertion, because that would be a shocking breach of international law as well. But then suddenly President Trump astonished the world by arranging the meeting that was held in Singapore, the first meeting between him and Kim Jong-un. And of course, as with most things that President Trump did, it was full of razzmatazz and lots of television and lots of media and inevitably lots of tweets. I remember thinking at the time that actually this might be a good step, because I agree with Professor Emmett that in a very dangerous situation, simply refusing to have any dialogue is not necessarily going to get any progress. And therefore, I thought, well, at least he's trying something new and different. And I was hopeful that he would produce results. But a problem arose at the very beginning that President Trump could not get his magic lips around the words human rights. He was like President Reagan, who, by the way, with the support of Senator Lugar and other Republicans in the Senate, did some very good things in nuclear non-proliferation. But President Trump Reagan couldn't get his magic lips around the acronym AIDS. In the first term in office, he never once referred to HIV/AIDS. Meanwhile, a lot of Americans got infected with AIDS, whereas we in Australia were talking about it and responding to it and dealing with it. But President Trump had difficulty dealing with things he was uncomfortable with. And one of them was COVID-19 when it came along. But another was the issue of human rights, global human rights for everyone. It's astonishing to me that an American president would not understand that human rights are one of the great gifts of the United States, universal human rights. When I was a little boy in Australia, in Sydney, Australia, in my local public school, we all got a copy of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And as a little boy in 1944, I saw Eleanor Roosevelt go past my school representing President F.D. Roosevelt to a big new hospital in a nearby suburb which had been built with American aid for veterans, American and Australian, from the Pacific War. And I remember seeing this great lady go past my school. I swear that we locked eyes. I saw her, and ever since I've been interested in and committed to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. As it happened, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations, meeting in Paris. This was before they had their headquarters in New York or Lake Success, meeting in Paris to adopt the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, NEM/CON. No one voted against it. South Africa and Saudi Arabia didn't vote for it, but no one, including the Soviet states, voted against it. And this was something Eleanor and her committee had developed, and it was brought into effect by an Australian, Dr. H.V. Evatt, Herbert Evatt, who was the president of the General Assembly at the time, 1948, December 48, a great moment in world history. And so why a president of the United States would not understand that this was a very important gift of the United States to the whole world, and that you couldn't get peace and security in the Korean Peninsula if you ignored the terrible situation of human rights within the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. But President Trump never spoke about human rights in North Korea, and he never talked about it at any of the 3 meetings he had with Kim Jong-un, in Singapore, in Hanoi, and in the demilitarized zone of Korea. And this has been the problem that we are in, and it's the problem that we must solve. Notwithstanding that, the Commission of Inquiry on North Korea had a number of achievements. The public hearings, the establishment of a field office in Seoul to continue the work of gathering the data. North Korea didn't let the special rapporteur on human rights enter, but they did let the special rapporteur on disabilities go into North Korea, and they have improved, apparently, their law and policies on disabilities. The exchange of military remains, that was something which was specifically agreed in Singapore, and that has been fulfilled. International media have increased their coverage of North Korea. The BBC has restarted its Korean language broadcasts, but of course it's a serious offense in North Korea to be caught listening, though some people listen to the Voice of America and the BBC. So there were a number of achievements, but there were a number of failures. The failures include that the Commission of Inquiry recommended that the report be delivered to the Security Council and placed on the Security Council agenda, and that the Security Council should refer the case of North Korea to a prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. That is the alternative way that you can get a case of human rights abuses to the International Criminal Court, even in a country that is not a party to them. That step has not been taken, and it's unlikely to be taken whilst China and the Russian Federation oppose taking that step. Family reunions, which are very urgent, because many of those who are in divided families are now very old, and unless the reunions are conducted soon, then people will not be able to have reunions. They don't even have postage between North Korea and South Korea. They don't allow people to telephone from North Korea to South Korea. And China has not been cooperative in respect of refugees who have escaped from North Korea into China. China has a memorandum of understanding simply to send them back to North Korea, although under international refugee law, that cannot be done if there is a well-founded fear of persecution on the part of the refugee. That's called refoulement. And the economic breakdown, the humanitarian issues, the COVID-19 pandemic as it affects North Korea, all of these are areas of failure, and that has to be acknowledged. So we have some achievements and we have some failures, and we then come to what is the central issue that I want you to focus on, and that is, how do we get North Korea to be answerable to the international community, the United Nations, and answerable to the crimes against humanity which have been found in the report of the Commission of Inquiry. After the Second World War, with the discovery of the crimes against humanity, the world promised that it would never again turn its back on crimes against humanity. Crimes against humanity are not just human rights abuses. Every country has human rights abuses, including my own country, Australia. The way we deal with refugees by sending them out to be kept on islands off the coast is not in conformity with human rights principles and rules, including treaties we've signed up to. But crimes against humanity are something bigger. Crimes against humanity are violent crimes done with state authority that shock the conscience of humanity. And the Commission of Inquiry found crimes against humanity and said these have to be attended to. Well, we're not attending to them. And how do we attend to them if just mentioning them turns North Korea to walk out of the discussion? This is the quandary. This is the essential problem. And it's true also of Iran. And it's the problem that Professor Emmett mentioned in his wonderful address today. So this brings me to, in the specific case of North Korea, to the general problem. How does the world deal with crimes that shock the conscience of humankind everywhere, when just to mention that is going to make it difficult to deal with problems of nuclear weapons and delivering missiles? Now, in our report on North Korea, we didn't really deal with the nuclear issue, in part because it had not fully developed at that stage, but in part because we had other fish to fry, and we thought that was something the Security Council would deal with. But looking back, I think we should have dealt with the nuclear issue, because obviously nuclear weapons present the risks and threats of crimes against humanity and of other great crimes for those that are affected by them. So this is what I wanted to tell you about today. It all comes together in the Charter of the United Nations and in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and in the realization after Hiroshima that unless we got our act together on this little blue planet and dealt with problems as an international community, we're just not going to survive as a species. And that is terribly, desperately urgent. So how do we deal with that and do what we promised we would do after the Second World War, respond to the problems of crimes against humanity at least? And that's the challenge. And it's not going to go away because we don't talk about it. And it's important to talk about it. And one particular case, but only one case, is the report of the Commission of Inquiry on North Korea. And unless we get this right in the case of North Korea, we're not going to get it right in the case of other states that develop nuclear weapons and endanger the future of humankind. So that's what I came to tell you at Indiana University. It's not the evening over there. Over here in Sydney, it is summer. There is sunshine outside. Lots of people are at the beach and enjoying themselves. But I'm in here slaving away as judges and ex-judges and professors tend to do. But I'll do anything for Indiana University. You've got an Aussie as your president. He's about to step down, but Michael McRobbie's done a great job as president of Indiana University, and I feel a great admiration for Dr. Kinsey, the work he did on sexuality and liberating LGBT people around the world by the knowledge of truth. And I love to be associated with Indiana University, and especially when Justice Sullivan is in charge, because I know he'll tell me to shut up and to allow time for questions.
Well, thank you, Justice Kirby, for a really a splendid talk and most interesting set of observations. And I think what I would say most of all is that as interesting as the specific comments about North Korea are, the transferability to so many other issues and problems of the way in which you went about doing your work and the issues that remain will stick with all of us as we face issues in the years to come. And neither you nor I will be around when a great many of the students and others watching this broadcast today confront the problems of the future. But they will have learned a great deal from your presentation. We have several questions for you. If I could detain you from going to the beach just a little bit longer. One question is, do you think that any kind of satisfactory human rights reform in North Korea is feasible while the Kim dynasty retains absolute control?
In our report, as we were a United Nations committee, which had been set up by the Human Rights Council, we did not accept an option of regime change. I mean, the United Nations has members. North Korea is a member state. There is an issue as to whether, like South Africa, because of its non-cooperation, it should be suspended. But then that would run into the problem that Professor Emmett mentioned, that you suspend them and then you put them out of the dialogue. And therefore, in many ways, it's better to have them in the dialogue. What we've got to do is to get the germ of the idea that was a good idea that President Trump had, and that is have dialogue and dangle before them the possibility of economic development. He dangled before Kim Jong-un the wonderful, alluring possibility of Trump hotels all over North Korea, and people coming into North Korea and playing golf, which is very popular in that part of the world, and so on. And you know, after the Second World War, the magnificent and wonderful work of President F.D. Roosevelt, and after the war, President Truman, and of George Marshall and the Marshall Plan, and helping those who had been our enemies to build their economies and to build stable democratic regimes. Now, not enough attention has been paid to that period of transition and how that could be done, and how that could be done successfully in cases like North Korea, Iran, and other countries. But I think up there in the State Department, where there are all these very, very brilliant people, you know, I work with those guys in the State Department, and it was during the Obama administration. But they were very clever people, and I think they should be going back to 1945 and 46, getting out the files of the Marshall Plan and seeing how was it done then? How did it? The times are not the same. The countries are not the same. The challenges are greater. The challenges are certainly more urgent because of the nuclear weapons. But um, we've got to think outside the circle. We mustn't ignore human rights, especially crimes against humanity, but we've got to think in a more imaginative way of what we can do to allure North Korea into dialogue about human rights and peace and security. There will never be peace and security on the Korean Peninsula until the issues of human rights are dealt with effectively.
Thank you, Justice Kirby. I have another question here about North Korea, and then still another about China. Why don't we stay with North Korea here and focus, rather than on human rights, on the nuclear issue? Our questioner asks, one of the justifications that North Korea has given for its nuclear program, and I suppose one might say the same thing about Iran, is that nothing else will ensure its sovereignty, citing the fate of nations such as Iraq. Given this fact, do you think that there's any realistic way to convince the regime to pursue nuclear disarmament?
Well, without the kind of originality and fresh thinking that I mentioned in the answer to the last question, I don't think there's any chance that North Korea is just going to give up its nuclear weapons. That's why there was an element of unreason in the approach, with respect, as I have to say as a foreigner, that President Trump took to North Korea, just asking them to give up their nuclear weapons and missiles on the chance that they would get Trump hotels, was really not a sensible, rational way to proceed. But there is a sensible and rational way to proceed. And what we have to do is explore it. And we owe this to ourselves, because don't think North Korea and Iran are going to be the last two countries that are going to go down this nuclear track. I mean, we thought for a time, well, at least the only countries that have nuclear weapons are the P5, the permanent, serious countries in the Security Council. But then more began to develop and secure nuclear weapons, and now a very small player, North Korea. North Korea has even fewer people than Australia. We've got 26 million, they've got 24 million. And here is this country with a small population, but these remarkable and extremely dangerous weapons. And as many observers say, nuclear weapons are not just dangerous for leaders who fall into rage. They're also dangerous for mistakes, for errors, for accidents, for misunderstanding of events. And if you look at our species, which has lasted so many thousands of years, and all the wonders of J.S. Bach's music and the great painters and the poets of the English language, all of that could be wiped out in a couple of days. I mean, this is the truth, and this ought to mobilize the world community. But how you get that, that's what we've got to get those guys in the State Department and in human rights organizations and important academics and lawyers and judges thinking about, because it literally is a matter of survival of the species.
I think that, as I recall, the cover of the Economist magazine just within the last 60 days was on this subject. The headline was something like, "Who's next?"
Yes.
And So a lot of people are thinking these same terrifying thoughts. Let me switch to China, if I could. The question asks, and I'm going to amplify on it in just a second, whether there is a better way the international community can deal with China in respect of human rights abuses. And I suspect this question here particularly concerns the Uyghurs. And of course, there are a number of ethnic minorities around the world for whom we all share concern. The Rohingya are very much in mind these days, too. I just wanted to say, as to the Uyghurs, the very first time that I heard about the Uyghurs was in respect to Justice David's assignment at Guantanamo, where a number of, as I recall, Uyghurs had been imprisoned, Muslims, and they didn't really want to go back to China, as I recall, and sort of became stateless people. But in any event, China is a real conundrum in this respect, isn't it?
Well, it is a conundrum, and it's not simply the Uyghurs. It's also the issue of Taiwan, the issue of Hong Kong. China has a great fear of what it calls splitism. That is to say, it's very afraid that in the outlying regions of China, including Tibet, that parts of the nation will split away, and that will start a course of events that will be greatly damaging to the integrity of the Chinese nation and that the economy of the Chinese nation and its capacity to keep together. And therefore, if you read any material coming out of China under President Xi, it's got plenty of material of fear of splitism, and of course it's not the only country that has these fears. Burma is another country that does, and this is a problem where the old issue of self-determination of peoples that exercised the mind of President Wilson at the end of the First World War is still with us, and it's still a source of great potential disruption. But China is a special case because China is extremely large and very powerful. On the other hand, China, as I think Professor Emmett said, has, at least in the past, pre-President Xi, been very favorable to the international rule of law in the sense of sticking to a rules-based system. And even on the case of North Korea, if there have been sanctions imposed by the Security Council against North Korea, as there have, that could not have happened without the vote of the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China. So that signals that, at least on the matter of Korea, China is concerned itself for the dangers to China of the sudden breakdown of the regime in North Korea, and it's concerned that that could be dangerous to the integrity of China because there's a large population of Korean Chinese in the northeast corner of the People's Republic of China. So the issues of splitism and the issues of respecting China's national sovereignty are important, but all of that has to be seen in the context of the United Nations and the Charter of the United Nations. The one thing we learn as judges is context. Context, context, context. That's how we can understand a particular problem. That's how we can understand the particular problem of Guantanamo Bay in the context of the traditions of the United States and its international posture. But this is what we've got to look at. The Commission of Inquiry had a lot of problems with China. China would not cooperate. The Russian Federation did cooperate. It was very interesting going to meet the Russian ambassador. He said, we know where our comrade friends in North Korea are coming from because we went through all this. And that's what the ambassador for the Russian Federation in Geneva said. And he said to us, if ever they do something which is favorable to human rights, give them due credit.
Yes.
Well, we did, but there wasn't, it was not rich pickings.
Yeah.
But anyway, this is what we have to do. We've got to reach out to China and try to engage with it, because it's not going away. It's very powerful, and it's very concerned about splitism and the breakup of the Chinese nation.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Justice Kirby, you've been very generous with your time, as you always are. And in saying goodbye to you, I would want to say to the members of our audience who may not know this, that you were scheduled to be at our law school in person almost exactly 1 year ago. And at the very last minute, due to COVID-related issues, you did not make the trip to North America. And as much as we missed having you, maybe it was just as well, because I understand that some Australians who were absent from their country at the time had difficulty getting back home. But we were very grateful to you for your willingness to travel here last year. We're very grateful for your being with us today, and we hope that you will be able to visit our law school in person before too long.
Thank you very much, Justice Solomon. My respects.
Thanks for your splendid remarks this afternoon. We've come, ladies and gentlemen, to the end of a really quite wonderful afternoon, and I want to take this opportunity to thank a number of people who made this possible. First and foremost, of course, our speakers, Justice Stephen David, Professor Frank Emmert, and Justice Michael Kirby. In addition, there are a number of other individuals associated with Indiana University, with our law school, and with the Law Review, who I want to thank by name. First of all, behind the scenes, making this webinar possible, are Brandon Cavanis and Chelsea Roberts from the University Central staff. From our own External Affairs Office, Jonna McDougall and Liz Allington have done a great deal to make this possible, including managing the very complicated continuing legal education requirements that we have all been able to take advantage of here, at least those of us who need continuing legal education credit. That probably includes just about all of us except Justice Kirby. Finally, a particular word of praise and thanks to three of our wonderful students who, as leaders of the Indiana International and Comparative Law Review, conceived of and executed this afternoon's program. Zach Reichley, the associate editor of this symposium, Koa Trin, the symposium editor, and the editor-in-chief of the Indiana International and Comparative Law Review, the woman for whom we all work, Ariel Anderson. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of our program today. Thanks so very much for joining us. My hope is that you'll continue to support our law school and this law review. And Justice Kirby and I are signing off here with our masks on to remind all of you that it's still quite dangerous out there, and that we should all take care. Thanks very much.